Hey guys, and welcome to day 3 of English Hacks webinar series. And day 3 is called Don't Call Me Sir, Pal. And this is where we're going to be talking a lot about formal English and informal English. And we're really going to look at why it's more natural to speak informally than to speak formally, and which situations we need to remember so that we speak formally in the right situations, and when we need to make sure that we don't speak formally, all right? So today's lesson is really about choosing the right style of the language that you are using. And it's day 3, so I hope you guys know who I am, but in case you forgot, I am Kris Amerikos, and I'm here because I love to teach English. So make sure that you join all of the channels that you see on the screen right now, and you can go to my website, english.krisamerikos.com, if you want to find out more. Okay, let's get into it. So the big question that we want to ask and answer today is, when do people use formal English and when do they use informal English? Now, maybe we should talk a little bit first of all about what informal and formal English are. First of all, we can say that formal English follows the rules. It's formal because it has what we call formal rules. And when you speak formally, people think that you're being more serious. They might think you're being more polite, but also in some situations, people might think the opposite. They might think that you're joking if you use formal English, or they might think that you're being rude. We're going to talk about that a little bit more today. And informal English is really the type of English that we use all the time. We don't think so much about the rules, and we don't follow some kind of standard, and that's why it's informal. It doesn't have those formal rules, or we don't use them as much. So right now, while I'm talking, I want you to start thinking of some situations where you can use formal English and situations where you can use informal English. And you can write them in the chat here in the webinar, or you can write them in the chat on Telegram. And as we continue to discuss this topic throughout the day, I want you to keep one thing in mind, all right? Think about this. In your language or in your country, people might use formal or informal language differently. And people might have different situations or different standards for using these different types of language. In some languages, there are special words that you need to say. In other languages, it's a special construction. In English, we have a mix of both of those, but we don't really have a lot of words that we can use to show that something is formal. Instead, we use a lot of indirect language. And we spoke about indirect language a little bit already in day 1. But indirect language lets us be more formal and lets us be more polite. So an example of formal English would be, could you help me with this? Or would you mind opening the window? Something like this. So it's a special construction that we add, or that changes the phrase that we already had, and it makes it more polite and it makes it more formal. And we could say that there are words or phrases or constructions that make a sentence informal as well. But no matter when you use formal and informal language in your country, when you're speaking your language, in English, we need to understand when to do this and when not to. So again, remember guys, in each English-speaking country, it might be a little bit different. And I am an American English speaker, so I am going to tell you a little bit about what's true for the United States. And I think that it's pretty general that a lot of English-speaking countries have similar ideas of when to be formal and when to be informal. But make sure that you pay attention to this if you travel to another country. And I told you that there are some special words that we can use to show people that we're using formal English. And the name of today's lesson is one of those, sir, right? I said, don't call me sir, pal. That's because the word sir is formal and the word pal is informal, all right? So don't call me sir, pal, means don't be formal with me, friend. And yeah, the word pal means friend. And this is really how we could describe English in general. You should use formal language in speech very rarely. There are only a few situations where you really need this type of language. For just about every other situation, and even for the formal situations that we're going to talk about, a lot of people just use informal English. So, for example, let's say that we have a job interview. At a job interview, probably we want to talk to the person who's interviewing us in formal English. But a lot of people still use informal English today, and it's becoming more custom, more usual even for the person who's interviewing you to use informal English, to make this interview feel more personal, more individual, like you're being interviewed by a person, not a robot or a machine, not by a huge company. All right? So it gives you more personal contact. There aren't as many barriers. So we're going to talk a lot more about this today. Let's consider the following sentences. First, let's stop for the night. Or, let's adjourn for the evening. So here we can see that the second sentence is more formal. The first sentence is more informal. And when would we use these? Well, honestly, guys, I can't think of any situations where I would say, let's adjourn for the evening, unless I was making a joke by making an informal situation sound formal. And this would be funny to a native speaker because we're using the wrong language style for this situation. Another example, number 1, you eat sushi with chopsticks, not a fork. And number 2, sushi should be eaten with chopsticks, not with a fork. So here we can see that number 1 again is informal and number 2 is formal. And what we've done is in sentence 1, we used the universal or generic you. You eat sushi. And here you doesn't mean just you, it means anyone, right? We talked about that already. Then when we look at the second sentence, sushi should be eaten with chopsticks. So here we can see that we're using passive voice, and passive voice sounds more formal. It sounds more indirect, and we use it less in speech. So again, guys, formal English is used much less, okay? And we need to really remember that. And you know, the problem is that most people, when they start learning English at school or university or maybe on their own, they learn all of the formal rules. And then they expect that English speakers are going to speak like that. So basically, they learn from a book, and they expect everyone to sound like a book, and that's why they themselves sound like a book. And we, you know, after going through this course, definitely we don't want to sound like a book. We don't want to sound like a robot. We want to sound natural. So like I said, you need to remember this really, really big idea, that there are less formal situations than informal ones. So let's take a closer look at the differences between formal and informal English. First of all, we'll talk about formal English. So formal English is used in situations that are more serious, like we've already said. For example, a job interview, or maybe writing to a professor, speaking to someone you don't know very well, or when serving a customer. All right, so let's go into a couple of these situations. Writing to a professor. So in general, if we want someone to take us seriously about something when we are writing, then we use formal English. And in general, in writing, we use formal English more than we do in speech. However, people today who tend to communicate more by writing, because we have text messages, we have social media pages and messages there. We have messages all over the place. And so messages today are considered to be an informal type of communication, whereas email is considered to be more of a formal type of communication. So you are more likely to see formal English in an email and informal English in a message. The next case, speaking to someone you don't know very well, even in this situation, a lot of people will use informal English. They'll say, "Hey, buddy, what are you doing?" But remember that we have some words that we can just add to a sentence to make it sound more formal. So, for example, if we didn't say, "Hey, buddy, what are you doing?" We could say, "Excuse me, sir, how may I help you?" See, this is basically the same idea, that we need to get someone's attention and we need to get an answer from them about what they need right now, about what they want and what they're doing. So this does this in a formal way. So notice that instead of hey or hi or yo, instead of saying any of those informal words, first we said excuse me. So this is a more formal way to get someone's attention. So first we said excuse me, and then we understood if it's a man or a woman. If it's a man, we say sir. If it's a woman, we say ma'am, which is a short form of madam. So ma'am. We just don't say D. We just say M-A apostrophe A-M, ma'am. Or we could use, and these are really the two ways of addressing someone, ways of identifying someone that we use in English. We don't really use others. And then let's take a look at the question that I asked. I said, "How may I help you?" Instead of just asking him directly, "What are you doing?" or "What do you need?" or "What are you looking for?" Now, let's say that you are riding a train and you want to speak to someone who you don't know at all. So you want to speak to a stranger, a new person who you've never met before. And you need to get their attention, and then you need to ask them a question. So first, you need to decide, are you going to use formal English or are you going to use informal English? If you use informal English, the person might feel that this is not the correct choice. They might think that someone should speak to them in a formal way when they don't know them. But most young people today, people who have grown up with the internet, they are used to speaking informally almost all the time. So we can think about informal and formal English in this situation in the following way. So there's a person on the train and you don't know him, and you go up to him and you say, "Excuse me, sir, where are you from?" This is very formal. This is formal English. Or maybe we want to say, "Excuse me, sir, do you mind telling me where you're from?" Or, "Excuse me, sir, would it be all right if I asked you a question?" Or, "Excuse me, sir, would you be able to tell me where you're from?" Remember, guys, that in formal English, and just being polite in English in general, we want to give the person who's listening a choice. We don't want to give a command. We don't want to just say, "Tell me where you're from," because this will sound very rude. Instead, we want to give the person a choice, and usually words like could you, can you, may I, and different things like this will give the person a choice. On the other hand, if you want to talk to a guy who you don't know on the train, you could go up to him and say, "Hey, where are you from?" See, it's very easy. It's just informal English. You don't have to think about it so much. "Hey, where are you from?" And this is completely fine. And most people won't have a problem talking to you like this. All right, in the last situation that we brought up, when serving a customer. So let's say that you have a job in an English-speaking country, or you just have a job in your country and there's an English speaker who comes in and wants to buy something. So again, we want to use formal English. We'll say phrases like "excuse me, sir," and this is just to get their attention and to address them, right? To start speaking to them. But when we're speaking to customers, we ask lots of questions. We want to make sure that we are speaking to them very politely. So these questions have lots of words and are very indirect, and sometimes they can be hard to formulate or to remember. One example of these questions is, what would you like to buy? Or could I possibly help you with something? Or would you like me to assist you in finding what you're looking for? So having these big, indirect, long, serious sounding questions will make us sound more formal, and this is correct. This is appropriate for a situation where you're speaking to a customer. All right? But in most other situations, it's not very appropriate, and it will sound very strange. So that's why we need to understand when to use formal English and when to use informal English. I can tell you guys that the majority of non-native speakers that I hear speaking English, the thing that really sets them apart or puts them in a different category is that they speak like a book. They only speak formal English, and even when other people around them are speaking informal English, anytime that they want to express themselves, they go to formal English first instead of going to informal English. All right? So, sure, it might be safer to do that, to start with formal English all the time and then go to informal English. But let's think about it like this. If we use formal English in about 2% of all of our communication, and we use informal English in the other 98%, then you are taking a big risk. I mean, the odds are not in your favor. There's not good percentages here for you to be correct, because if you start with formal English, that means that 98% of the time you're going to be unnatural or you're going to make the wrong decision. And sure, 2% of the time you protected yourself and you were not rude, or you used formal English correctly. But if we turn it around and if we always start with informal English and we always think about how to say it in the informal way, then that means that 98% of the time we're going to be correct and only 2% of the time we're going to make a mistake. So I think that that's a much better approach. So I definitely advise you guys to start with informal English. Just in your mind, always be thinking, okay, this phrase is formal, so I need to know it and I need to remember it, but I don't need to use it all the time. Instead, I should find another phrase or another word that's going to be more informal. All right? So start building up these categories in your mind. Separate them so that you speak more informally. Another thing to consider is that formal English uses longer, fuller sentences and perfect grammar. And of course, since we're comparing that to informal English uses shorter, less full sentences and has mistakes in grammar. Even native speakers speak like this. All right? So an informal sentence will be shorter. An informal sentence might not be a complete sentence. We might not use some of the parts of the sentence. So it might depend on the context more. And there will be grammar mistakes. So people aren't really thinking about what they're saying. And when they make a mistake, nobody really cares, because the point was communication, and we're not worried about impressing someone or being formal. And here we have another example you can see on the screen right now. We would love to have you over, or you can come over. All right, so we have the formal version and we have the informal version. Formal is, we would love to have you over. This is what you can say if you want to invite someone to your house for a gathering or a party or whatever you want to call it. When you invite someone to your house, you can say, we would love to have you over. And this would be a formal invitation. Whereas you can say, you can come over. This is an informal invitation. So let's think about formal English like fashion. Formal English is really something that's fashionable and sounds really cool and sounds great when it's used correctly. But just like fashion, if you wear the wrong thing in the wrong situation, it won't matter how cool those clothes are. So wearing formal clothing is great. It looks great and you look great in it. Still, we don't wear formal clothes everywhere all the time. We usually wear everyday clothes or informal ones. So think about this. You go to the beach. Most people are going to swim. They wear a swimsuit, and they're going to lay on the sand. They're going to go in the ocean or river or wherever they are, and they are going to lay in the sun, right? So it would look pretty strange if you saw a guy wearing a suit, like a tie and a jacket and pants. It would look kind of strange because this is not the right situation for a suit. And because the beach is an informal place where we wear less formal clothing. And this is the same about the English language. Okay, we know that you're not really going to a beach to practice English, but you might be in a situation where you're with friends or you're with young people who don't need to speak so formally, or lots of other situations where people have already become familiar with each other and they don't need to use this formal language. So if you're going to a beach, like what I just described, a conversation beach, let's call it that, then you can use informal English. You can wear swimming trunks. You shouldn't wear a suit. All right? On the other hand, if you're going to a wedding, if you're going to a serious situation where you'll need to speak serious English, and we've already described those before. Maybe you're going to apply for a visa at the American or British consulate in your city. Maybe you're going to have a job interview in English. So if you have an English conversation that's like a wedding, like this, a formal situation, then of course you need to wear formal clothes. So you shouldn't wear your swimsuit to the interview. You shouldn't wear your swimsuit to the wedding, right? This is the difference, and we need to be able to understand how to dress our words. The words are like the clothes that we're putting on. So we're putting these words onto our communication. And when we dress our communication, we need to understand the situation that we're speaking in. So here are some of the basics of formal English. When we're speaking formal English or when we're writing formal English, it's better not to use contractions. So you don't say can't, you say cannot. You don't say shouldn't, you say should not. You don't say I'm, you say I am. You don't say you're, you say you are. We also don't use a lot of phrasal verbs in formal English. Guys, just think about it like this. All of the short, fast things that people say are informal English. And with formal English, you need to choose more wisely. You need to choose different words. So usually a native speaker might say something like, I got mixed up. But in formal English, they would say, I got confused. They might tell you, I need to get over this illness. But in formal English, they'll say, I need to recover from this illness. And they might say that you need to blow up the mattress. But if it's formal English, they'll say, you need to inflate the mattress. So these are some things that you need to understand, remember, and practice. And every time that you learn a phrasal verb, it's a good idea to also learn a bigger word with it. However, that can be confusing because phrasal verbs are hard enough to learn. So because we use informal English more than formal English, I'm going to tell you not to pay attention to this idea or this concept too much. Just know it so that when native speakers talk to you and they use longer, bigger words and don't use phrasal verbs, you understand why they do that. Also, we want to avoid using slang in formal English. So things like what's up or yo, we shouldn't say them. We should say hello. And another example is using the word awesome. Instead, we should say something like great or excellent. We also want to avoid using first-person pronouns. So that's the words I and we. So instead of saying we believe it isn't true, we should say it is believed to be untrue. So again, this is passive voice. and we use more passive voice in formal English. And remember that I told you it sounds unnatural to use passive voice in your speech all the time. And that's why, like I said, we use formal English less. A very little bit, actually, not very often. And we use formal English more in writing. We also use passive voice more in writing. So passive voice sounds a little more formal. And also, if we look at these two sentences again, we believe it isn't true. This shows what we believe. So we're taking credit for this and we're taking responsibility for this. We believe this. But in the passive voice or the formal English sentence, we said, it is believed to be untrue. So here we don't know who believes this. We're actually hiding with this sentence because we didn't say whose opinion it is. And another thing we want to avoid in formal English is the use of acronyms. So things like FYI, which means for your information, or DIY, do it yourself, or LBC, Long Beach County, and other things like this. We want to avoid them. So, for example, if I'm speaking informal English, I might tell someone, yeah, I'm from USA. But if I talk to someone in formal English, then I'm going to say, I'm from the United States. Do you see? I have the option to use a shorter word, but that would be informal. In general, we can think about it like that. So we already compared formal English to fashion and to wearing different types of clothes. But formal English is really like tying a tie. It's hard when you're not used to doing it. So in my experience, people who are learning English as a foreign language, they actually have a lot of experience using formal English and hearing formal English and reading formal English. So for them, it's not so difficult when someone follows the basics of formal English. What's difficult for them is when someone uses a lot of very informal English, or when someone uses very high vocabulary, high-level vocabulary in their formal English. So if you look at some official documents or government documents and you try to read them and understand them, it would be pretty hard for you because they use words and vocabulary that we don't use in everyday English. So you've probably never heard them or seen them before. And they might also have a special meaning in this context or in this situation. So we know that different countries have different cultures. And in some countries, you need to dress up more often than in other countries. So when I lived in Italy, for example, people dressed up every time they went out of their house. The same when I lived in Russia. But in a country like the United States, people don't dress up very often. And this means that it's okay to go out of the house without looking your best, or you can go to a restaurant or to a shop and wear the clothes that you were sleeping in from the night before. You can wear your pajamas to the shop and nobody thinks that it's strange. So guys, I'm going to tell you this. When you go to a country, look at how the people dress. All right? How they dress is going to tell you something about how often they use formal language. If a person wears a suit and tie every single day, even on his days off, then probably this person uses more formal English than a person who wears a t-shirt every day. So in America, we don't use formal English very often at all. You know, there might only be several situations in a year where someone needs to use formal English. The rest of the time we're using informal English. So it's just like a tie. We can say that only several times a year we have to put on our tie. Other days throughout the year we can wear a nice shirt, we can dress very well, but we don't wear a tie. We don't go that extra step to be formal. And now let's talk about informal English. Here are some of the basics of informal English. A lot of people don't understand that informal English is a special type of language, a special way of communicating. So they might call it normal English and formal English because formal English sounds strange to them, and informal English is what they say, what they use every day. So they call it normal English. Informal English is generally more natural, like we said already. So if we're trying to be natural, and that's the goal of this course, then learn how to use informal English and stop using formal English so much. Informal English is also very readable and understandable when we compare it to formal English, because informal English has simpler words and smaller words. Informal English has words that we already know, and the point of informal English is to speak so that the person understands you. This is about communication more. Formal English is about following rules and being correct. And remember, guys, formal language is good, and sometimes it's more appropriate than informal language, but it's not always right, and it isn't the ideal form of language. Okay, so just because you speak it correctly, just because you follow all the rules, just because you're very polite, that doesn't mean that this is the best form of the language. It doesn't mean that this is the right way to speak. Okay, following all of the rules doesn't mean that this is correct for every situation. Another thing to remember is that informal English has its advantages. It's more flexible, and it lets you say what you mean more directly. You don't need to add in a lot of extra words. Informal English lets you express yourself better than formal English, really, because you can use lots of filler words, you can use abbreviations and acronyms, you can use anything you want, really, because informal English doesn't follow the rules 100%. It has its own rules, but it doesn't follow the formal rules 100%. Informal English allows contractions and full forms. So if we said that you cannot use the word can't in formal English, instead we should use cannot. In informal English, actually, you can use both. And when we use can't, it's going to be just the usual way that we're speaking. And when we say cannot in informal English, then it's going to be used as stress or emphasis, to say that this thing is very important that we're talking about. And we want to get people to focus on what we're saying, that you cannot do this again, or you can't do this again. Do you hear the difference? So we used cannot to stress this, even though we might be using informal English in general. So here are some different situations, and we're going to compare formal English and informal English, and you should think, which one is correct? And what would you say, or what would you do in this situation? So first, would you mind passing me the salt, please? Now this sounds like one of our examples from a little bit earlier today. And it's always important to remember your manners, especially when you're eating with business associates or important guests. So this describes a formal situation. But when you're just grabbing a bite to eat with friends and you need the salt, it's quite okay to just say, hey, pass the salt. So this is another example of formal and informal language. And really it depends on who you are with. You know, if you go to a small cafe near your work with one of your colleagues, probably you're going to use informal English. If you go to a very expensive, very exotic restaurant and you're there with a potential client, then probably you want to use formal English. Coming and going. You receive an urgent message during an important meeting. So you ask, would you excuse me for a moment, please? Do you see? We gave the listeners a choice here. Would you excuse me? Really, I need to go do something, right? I don't need your permission for me to get up and leave and take my phone call. But we ask this indirect question because this is going to be more polite and more formal. But if you're with your friends, you can just tell them, hang on a sec, or I'll be right back. Okay, so remember, it's not always impolite to be informal. Yes, formal English is usually considered more polite, but it doesn't mean that informal English is impolite. Next, meetings and greetings. A lot of people who have been studying English for a long time they still use the greeting, how do you do? How do you do? And while most books teach this greeting, in reality, people don't say this very often today. It was common in the past, but today it's only appropriate in some very formal situations. Definitely not with your friends. So if you have a person who you speak to a lot about different topics, for example, your English teacher, or for example, a colleague at work, then it's definitely not correct, not natural sounding at least, to say, how do you do? This is too formal. In most situations, we will choose a more common phrase like, how are you? Or, what's up? Or, how's it going? Or, what's new? These are better questions that we use today, and people don't usually say, how do you do? And what do you say if you didn't hear something, or if you aren't sure that you understood it correctly? So let's imagine that your customer is speaking to you, but you didn't understand what she said. In this situation, you don't need to panic. Just be polite and say, excuse me, but would you mind repeating that? So yeah, we asked them to excuse us again. We got their attention. And then we asked them an indirect question. Would you mind? So we're using all of the things that we've already discussed to make this formal, to make this more comfortable for the person who's listening, so that we're not commanding them. But on the other hand, if we're in a more casual situation, a more informal situation, we can just ask, come again? Or, what did you say? Or sometimes even, what? Or, sorry, what? And these are perfectly fine. The person who's listening understands that you're not sure about what they said for some reason. That maybe you didn't hear it, maybe you just didn't understand, and they need to repeat it. And another huge mistake that I see a lot of English learners make is they think that other people will think that they are stupid because they need things to be repeated for them. And guys, that's not true at all. You need to be comfortable asking people to repeat themselves. Even if you heard something, you might want to ask them to repeat it so that you can hear how they asked it and think about the word order or the pronunciation or something like that. Maybe it's an interesting phrase and you'd like to use it later. So ask them to repeat themselves. In English, this is perfectly fine, all right? Especially when you go to a shop or when you are a customer or a client at a business. In this situation, they should speak very formally to you, and you can choose to speak formally or to speak informally back to them. And you are the client or the customer, so if you need them to repeat something or to explain something in a different way, they definitely will do that, and they're not going to think anything bad about it. So get used to asking for help, get used to asking for people to repeat things and to explain things. Another one is about good impressions. This is quite an impressive abode, my dear. This is a very formal way to tell someone that you like their house or their home. The word abode is a word that we don't use very often. It's a formal word, and it means the place where you live or the place where you reside, the house. And then when we use my dear, guys, just don't say this, all right? Even writing this for this slide that you see on the screen, even writing this made me want to cry because nobody says my dear today. This is like, 50 years ago in the movies, someone might have said my dear. Today, nobody says that. The only thing that people actually say that's even close to this is when they're writing an email or a letter. And again, that might be a formal letter. They write dear at the beginning. So, if they're writing to me, like, Dear Kris, this is okay. But in speech, we don't say it, and we don't say my dear to people, okay? Let's forget that phrase completely. On the other hand, if you're over at a friend's place, there's no need for such serious language like this. Your friends would really laugh at you if you said this. And that's where earlier I said that sometimes when you use formal English, it can sound like a joke. And so if I said this phrase to my friends, "This is quite an impressive abode," my friends would laugh. They would laugh really hard because I'm using very formal English in a situation where I don't need to be formal at all. So instead, my friends would be happy if I say something like, "What a cool place, man. I really like your house. I like what you've done with this place. I like how you decorated your home. It feels really cozy here." Something like that. All right, let's not be too formal. So now we have another question to answer. Why does formal speech and overly correct speech sound strange to native speakers? And we've already pretty much answered this question. It's because of the context or because of the situation. So native speakers understand that in some situations you should use formal English and in others you shouldn't. And in the majority of situations you shouldn't use formal English. And when you break that rule of when you should use it, then that's when it sounds unnatural. That's when it sounds strange. So I just gave you an example of how formal English might sound funny to someone, but I also told you that sometimes formal English can sound rude. And how does that make sense if formal English is supposed to be more polite and uses more indirect language? How could it be rude? Well, it's rude when someone feels that you are not speaking to them as an equal, as a person who is the same as them, as an equal individual. They will be very offended by this because when you use formal speech, you're creating a barrier. You're putting a wall between you and the other person. And you're saying, this is me and that's you, and we need to separate ourselves. We're not speaking in a friendly way. And this is how it might sound rude. If someone is speaking to you very friendly and openly and with indirect language and with informal language, and then you answer them or you respond to them and you use formal language, they're going to think that something happened, something's wrong, and you're unhappy with something, and there's some kind of problem. All right, so this is another reason why it sounds strange. And guys, another reason why formal speech and overly correct speech sounds strange is because it really sounds like you're a robot, or it sounds like you're an English book, okay? It doesn't sound like you're a person. It doesn't sound like you have experience speaking the language. You just have experience reading it from a book, and that doesn't sound natural. So consider these things. Formal language can be used as a defense mechanism. So let's take the situation that you are working in a big company and someone tells you, your boss tells you that you're fired, or if you don't do more work, you're fired, or if you don't do something that isn't written in the contract, you're fired. And maybe this person just tells it to you in very simple, informal language. Hey, your work hasn't been very good lately. You have a week to correct this problem or you're fired. You could respond by using formal language and try to defend yourself. And you could say, I apologize if my work has been unsatisfactory. I will make an effort to improve my work. Thank you for making me aware of my faults. Would you mind describing what precisely I have done that hasn't been satisfactory? So again, when we use formal English, we're setting up walls. And sometimes we set up these walls to defend ourselves. Another reason we might use formal language is to put us on a pedestal. And if you don't know what a pedestal is, this is the thing that someone stands on when they speak to lots of people. It puts them on a higher level. So sometimes formal language sounds like we feel we're on a higher level than other people. We're looking down on other people. And when someone is trying to speak informal English with us and we answer with formal English all the time, they may think that that we don't want to be friends with them, we don't want to be friendly with them, and we might think that they want to push us away. They don't want us to come any closer to them because they're setting up this wall. And put yourself in other people's shoes. Okay, let's imagine that you're speaking to someone in a very friendly, very informal way, and then this person puts a wall between you and them. And now you have to speak over this wall. It's a little uncomfortable, right? And that's how formal language feels. It feels uncomfortable. People need to be more prepared. People need to think longer. People need to choose words more carefully. And this is not a relaxed feeling. This is a very uncomfortable feeling. So guys, in general, formal language creates barriers, and we've already given you a lot of examples of those barriers. So we want to remove those barriers. We want to sound more natural, and we want to communicate with more people. That's why we should reduce how much formal language we use and save that only for those specific situations where it's required. And also, using formal language all the time is almost the same thing as never smiling. So you probably know that English speakers smile when they speak. It's kind of an automatic thing. Part of the language is smiling and opening your mouth enough to pronounce all the words correctly. And usually when people speak to other people, they smile. So if you never smile when you speak, then people are going to think that there's some kind of problem or that you look very strange. The same is about formal language. If you always use formal language, people will think that there's a problem. People will think that something is strange. So here's another big idea. Formal language separates people into the categories us and them. So just like I said, you're speaking to someone and they put up a wall between you. Now there are two groups. There's two categories. There's the people on this side of the wall and the people on that side of the wall. So really, when you use formal English, what you're really doing is you're pushing people away from you. And if your goal is to become more natural, more fluent, and to have more experience speaking with native speakers, then you don't want to push people away. You want to engage people. You want to speak with more people and more people. The more the better, right? So you need to use informal English. Now, a few times today, I've already spoken about sounding like a book, sounding like a robot. So let's talk about book English versus street English. And guys, just don't speak like a book. Every time when you're studying from now on, I want you to think about that. Do I sound like a person or do I sound like a book? Am I using too much formal English? Am I being too polite? Am I trying to follow all of the rules too much? Am I listening? Remember, listening is the first step, and listening is one of the most important things you need to do. So listen to the other people around you, and do they say the same words that I say? Do they use formal or informal English? Okay, and then you'll see that probably you are using more formal English than they are, and probably you sound more like a book. So we want to pay attention to what they're doing and copy that. Then we'll sound more natural like them. So pay attention to how often people use words. I know that personally, I don't say the word telephone very often, maybe never. Instead, I use phone. I don't say television, I say TV. And I don't say refrigerator, I say fridge. So these are things that you should listen for so that you sound natural. And when you're paying attention to which words people use, you might want to write them down to make a little note for yourself. Like, remember, I gave you the four categories, the four systems. And one of them is content, choosing the right words. So you should go there and you should write the word that you thought you were supposed to use in this situation, and then you should write the word that you learned that people usually say in this situation, so that you can remember this and learn not to use that word, but to use this word. And when you go through your notes and when you review these systems and these lists that you've made, having the one that you thought that it was before and the new one, the more correct one now, that's going to help you. Not just writing down the new one, because what you want to do is you want to fill that space in your mind where you thought that you knew a concept and you want to replace that concept with a new one, okay? So just do it how I'm telling you and it will help you learn it a lot better. So the word sentence has lots of different meanings. So if we take different situations, people might use this word, sentence, to mean different things. So for example, if you're talking to an English teacher, a sentence is words that come together to have a meaning, right? If you're talking to a judge or a lawyer or an attorney, a sentence is a punishment. So many people also use Old English or antiquated English to make jokes or to refer to something from popular culture. So older words also can sound more formal because we don't hear them very often and we save them for special situations. But we might use them to make jokes. So there's an expression, come hither, and this means come here. It's just Old English. Hither was a word that meant to here. Today we don't have this word, we just say here. So we can say I am here about a location, and we can say come here about movement. But in Old English we had a special word about movement, hither. So we can say come hither. This is using Old English. And this sounds a little more formal, but today nobody says this. And the only time someone says this today is to make a joke. So let's look at some other words that we should not say, or how we can correct our speech to sound more natural. We never want to say the word shall. Please don't. Please, please do not say the word shall. All right? Nobody says shall today. You might find some examples from books where people say shall, but honestly, guys, nobody says shall in real life. So don't say shall. You saw it in your book. You understand what it means. Basically means will, right? Now you can forget it because now you're not going to use it anymore. Only in very old English or very strange formal English are you going to hear or say the word shall. Actually, just don't say it at all, okay? Please don't say shall. Also, don't say automobile. Say car. It's shorter. That's what people say. It's less formal. Don't say pardon me or pardon. Say excuse me. This is how we get people's attention. I already gave you lots of examples where we use this. And a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between sorry and excuse me? Well, sorry is what you say after you did something wrong. And excuse me is what you say before you do something. So you usually say excuse me just to get somebody's attention. Like, excuse me, are you listening? I hope you guys are listening. Instead of saying to locate, we can say to find. Instead of saying to depart or to exit, you can say to leave. And instead of saying to enter, you can say to go in. So let's consider how someone might say this formally or informally. I entered the room, but could not locate what was needed, so I exited. Lots of Latin-based words with Latin roots here, so they're more international. Maybe a lot of people who are non-native speakers would understand this, and native speakers, of course, would understand this too. They would just think it sounds very funny or very strange because it's too formal. It's way too formal for this situation. On the other hand, we could say that I went into the room, I couldn't find what I needed, so I left. And this would be much more natural, and this would be what native speakers would say in this situation. So, guys, don't speak like a book. Don't speak formal English all the time. Save it for the right situations. There are also some words that might be shortened to sound less formal, like the word invitation becomes invite. Did you get my invite? Vegetables becomes veggies. And I know you've heard these next three words a lot, and you probably know what they mean already, but I just have to remind you that native speakers say things like gotta, gonna, and wanna. And in case you don't know what they mean, gotta means got to or have to. And gonna means going to. And wanna means want to or want a. Like, I want a banana. I want a banana. I got a banana. I have a banana. Or I've got a banana. You see? All right, I'm going to move forward. Native speakers make a lot of mistakes. Let's remember that. They don't speak correctly all the time. They don't speak formally all the time. These are things that we need to forget about. These are things that you didn't learn from your English book. These are things that your English teacher didn't tell you because they wanted you to speak correct English. And I want you to speak correct English too, but I also want you to be understood and to sound natural so that when you speak English, people don't give you strange looks. And if you speak like a book, and if you never make mistakes, and if you always use formal English, people are going to give you strange looks. All right? So here's an example of mistakes that English speakers make all the time. And it's about subject-verb agreement, one of the basic aspects of any language. So, for example, a native speaker might say something like, "The salt and pepper is on the table." Now, this is not correct because we have two items in our subject, right? Salt and pepper, which means that salt and pepper are they. And we know that we always say they are. But here the native speaker didn't say are, he or she said is. And this is because everyone still understands this. I'm not telling you that you should make this mistake. I'm just telling you that when native speakers make this mistake, everyone understands and it's okay. And sure, it's not okay on a test about grammar. And sure, it's not okay when you're testing your level of English. But a lot of people say these kinds of things, and so we shouldn't think that that's strange or that that's incorrect. Actually, it's just one way of using spoken English. Another example of this is, "Where's my boots?" And of course, where's means where is. So where is my boots? This is not correct. My boots, again, it's they and they are. So we'd say, "Where are my boots?" But usually when someone says this, nobody corrects them, nobody tells them that they're wrong, they just understand and continue communicating. Another thing we should remember is that native speakers use the verb to get a lot. We use this word a lot. Get, got, so we know that there's three parts of this verb, right? Get, got. But that's in British English. In American English, people usually say get, got, gotten. Yes, gotten is the third form. So let's look at this paragraph that's on the screen right now where we use got a lot. "I got up and got dressed. Then I got in my car and got on the road. When I got to work, I got an angry phone call from a customer who had got a bad product. I got frustrated and got out of control, so I got fired. The next day, I got my boss to get me my job back." Wow, how many different uses of get and got are there here in this paragraph? So get and got can mean a lot of things. You should really, really, really spend some time on this verb and learn the main meanings and how people usually use this verb in conversation, because if you can use this fluently, like a native speaker, then you'll sound much more natural, definitely. And if we go through this paragraph, we can say some of the main meanings here. I got up. This means that I woke up and I got out of bed, right? I got dressed, so I put some clothes on. Then I got in my car. I entered my car. And got on the road. So I went to the place where I was on the road. So get could be to go from one place and to arrive at the next place. So got in my car, I arrived in my car. Got on the road, I arrived on the road. When I got to work, again, arrive, I got an angry phone call. So here, got means received. I received an angry phone call from a customer who had got a bad product. So again, here, got means receive. I got frustrated. Here we're using to get plus an adjective. So frustrated is an adjective. I got frustrated. In this case, got means become. I became frustrated. And got out of control. And became out of control. So I got fired. And to get fired means that someone takes your job away from you, right? The next day, I got my boss to get me my job back. So here, got my boss, this means I convinced him, or I persuaded him, or I influenced him to do this for me. And he made the situation so that I had my job back. He got me my job back. So here, get means take, right? He took my job back for me. He got me my job back. I know, that's really confusing, and there's a lot of different meanings of get and got. So make sure that you spend some time learning them and learn different phrases and different rules about using the verb to get with adjectives, with different parts of speech, and in different phrasal verbs. Also, native speakers say up a lot. And since we started talking about phrasal verbs, going to continue a little bit here. When we have a phrasal verb, we can add up to the end of a lot of phrasal verbs, and it gives it some special meaning. Usually it means something like to start doing something or to do something more or faster. But other times it means something a little bit different. So for example, eat up. We might say this to someone who is eating very slowly, or maybe you put a plate in front of them on the table and they're waiting and they haven't started eating yet. And you can tell them, eat up. Another one is drink up. So maybe you're at the bar and the bartender says that it's closing in 5 minutes. And your friend has a full glass of beer. And you look at him and you say, drink up. It's like start drinking, or drink more, or drink faster. Next is cut up, which again means start cutting or cut faster. And then we have think up. Think up is a little bit different. Think up means to create an idea in your mind. So to create some concept or to come up with is another phrasal verb that means the same thing. To come up with something or to think something up. Then we could also say to clean up. And this means like to completely clean or to clean some kind of area. It could also be like start cleaning or clean more, faster. The same with hurry up. Hurry already means to go faster. So hurry up is like go faster. Faster! And speak up. So here, it's not just about start speaking or speak more. Speak up is usually about volume. I can't hear you. Could you speak up? And this is something that you might want to write down and use in the future, because if someone is speaking to you very quietly or softly, you might tell them, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Could you please speak up? And this will mean speak louder and more clearly. And guys, different native speakers in different countries use different modifiers. I'll tell you what that means in a second, what modifiers are. But a lot of native speakers in one country might use the same modifiers a lot. Okay, so in different places they use different ones, but in each place they use the same one a lot. So, for example, in England, people use rather and quite. But in the United States, people don't use those modifiers so much. Instead, they use things like really and pretty. And they use the same ones a lot. They don't usually mix the modifiers with other ones. So, for example, an American person wouldn't usually say, I'm really tired and I'm quite hungry. Instead, they would say, I'm really tired and I'm really hungry. And the same for a British person. They would say, I'm quite tired and I'm quite hungry. They would not say, I'm quite tired and I'm really hungry. Again, every person is different, and sure, they might actually say some of the phrases that I said they usually wouldn't say, but the general population, the majority of people, that's what I'm talking about. And the majority of people use the same modifier, so the same word like this, like what we said before, like really, pretty, quite, rather, very, super, and there are lots of others also, they usually use the same one over and over and over again. So if we're trying to sound more natural, we should do the same. We should choose the ones that we're going to use, and it's better if we use the ones that are popular with those people in that country, and we're going to use the same ones over and over and over again, just like they do. Next, let's talk about euphemisms. You might be saying, what? Well, euphemism is basically just a phrase that means something else. It's like a metaphor. And this metaphor can be used because we don't want to say some other types of words. So we might want this the meaning of what we're saying to be a little bit of a secret, so that not everybody understands immediately, or so that it sounds less rude or more polite or softer in some way. So let's look at the example that we have here, and I hope that you can tolerate it because it's not a topic that we discuss all the time, but it is a very good example of how euphemisms can be used differently. So a scientific research paper might use words like urination. Maybe you know this word. Probably you do because it's from Latin, urination. But in everyday speech, most people don't say urination. Most people would say, go to the little boy's room, or go to the little girl's room. Or even more common is go to the bathroom. But with children, we might not say go to the little boy's room or go to the bathroom. We might also say something like go pee-pee or to tinkle. So this is a lot different. We already have 3 different groups of people. In science, so very official, very formal, right? We can say urinate. But when we speak to most people, for example, when I'm in a restaurant, I might ask someone, where's the bathroom? Could you tell me where the bathroom is? And when I'm leaving the table with my family or with anyone who I'm sitting at the table with and eating at the restaurant with, I might say, I need to go to the little boy's room, or I need to go to the bathroom. And this is very soft. This isn't like you're saying, I need to go to the toilet, and you're not describing what you're doing there. Instead, you're saying, I'm going to this room. I'm going to the bathroom. And then with children, we have some funny words, because when we speak to children, we like to speak like a child, right? We use some special words when we speak to children that we think sound better for them. Every language has its own special vocabulary for children, and English is no exception. And when we speak with friends, we might use something that's less polite, more like slang. For example, here, if we're talking about this topic, we could say to take a leak. So this would be something that we would say to our friends. We wouldn't say it in a formal situation, definitely. We wouldn't say it if we're at the table with our family maybe, or with people who aren't our good friends. We probably wouldn't say this to a child because it would be too rude, but we could say it with our friends. And it's a little rude, but it's a little funny. So that makes it okay. So this is what I'm talking about not sounding like a book. You need to learn these situations and these contexts and which phrases are appropriate and which ones aren't. And that is something that you have to do on your own, because it's going to depend on the country that you are trying to go to or the people who you're trying to speak with. And the last thing we want to talk about is ritualistic expressions, so rituals. And some of the most clearly ritualistic behavior can be seen with greetings and farewells. So when we say hi and when we say bye, these are things that we just do them, or we just say them because it's a ritual, because it's a tradition, it's a custom. Everybody does this. And it's okay for us to do it because everyone accepts this. This is the tradition that people continue to use. They continue to follow it. So these phrases in these situations have a transformed meaning. They're not the same meaning as we might think. So when you say something like, how do you do? Or what's up? Or how's it going? These are more like an introduction. They're not really like a question. And when you say to someone, what's up? They might answer, what's up? Or when you ask someone, how's it going? They might say, hey, how's it going? And a lot of times people who are learning English think that this is really strange. I asked him a question and he answered me with a question. That's not good communication, right? But it's okay. Don't worry about it so much. This is just a ritual. So people say a phrase and this means hi. And the next person says hi, right? This is okay. And it's the same when someone says, how's it going? And you say, hey, how's it going? Or when someone says, what's up? And you say, hey, what's up? So many people say, how are you? But don't expect an answer. They don't wait for an answer. It's just a ritual. And the same about when you're saying bye. People that are parting ways, people that are leaving somewhere, they might say, take care, or take it easy. And you might answer, you too, or you might answer, you take care, or you might answer, all right, yeah, take it easy, thanks. Something like this. So a lot of times people will use some kind of phrase to signal or to show the conversation has started and the conversation has ended. That's what these rituals are all about. So our homework for day 3, and I love webinars because your dog can't eat your homework, so you have to do your homework, and it's part of this series. It's how you're going to actually get results, all right? So you have to do this homework, and you're going to send the homework to the Telegram chat so that I can check it. And your homework is to say these things using informal English. The first is, invite me to dine at a culinary establishment. And you might be asking yourself, what? Kris, I thought it's informal English. That's right. I'm writing the sentences in formal English, and you have to change them to informal English, and you have to record them and send them to me in the Telegram chat where I will check them, all right? So I'm giving you the formal English version. And if you don't understand the formal English version, go translate the words you don't understand, try to understand it, and if you still don't understand it after you've tried to do that, then send me a message in the chat and I'll try to find another way to explain it to you so you can still do the task. But your task is really to understand what the formal phrases mean so that you can change them to an informal phrase. So again, there's 5 sentences that you need to do this with and send to me in the chat. And the first one is, invite me to dine at a culinary establishment. Number 2 is, bid me farewell when you are exiting a friendly gathering. Number 3 is, apologize for colliding with me in the supermarket. Number 4, call me in reference to an advertisement you saw published. And number 5, inquire about my timetable in the near future. All right, so I was using that weird voice just now to let you know that this is formal English. And that's kind of how you sound to people when you use formal English in situations that don't require formal English. You sound like you're using some strange voice or strange words. So do this homework, send it to me, and let's get started changing your language to be more informal. And thanks a lot for sticking with us and going through day 3. You're on your way to sounding much more natural, and you've only got 1 day left. If you have any questions at this point, feel free to contact me. You can go to my website, english.krisamerikos.com, or you can send an email. My email address is on the screen right now. But the best place for you to get answers is the private Telegram chat. And that's set up for you guys who have registered for days 2, 3, and 4, as well as day 1. And that Telegram chat is your resource. That's where you're going to get a lot out of. You're really going to get a lot out of that chat if you use it properly. So write a lot of questions there and ask me, and I'm going to answer. And don't forget about the Get Motivated with Kris Telegram channel, because I try to post some messages there almost every day and get people motivated and give you little tips and little pieces of advice about English. So that's it, and I will see you tomorrow.